My family called me a failure, until they discovered I owned the company, the son they stopped believing in. Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by people who were supposed to love you, yet felt completely invisible? I have. My name is Ethan Carter, and for most of my life, my family believed I would never become anything. To them, I wasn't the smart one. I wasn't the successful one. I wasn't the child they proudly introduced to friends. I was simply the disappointment. If someone had told me that one day those same people would stand in front of me speechless, I would have laughed, not because I didn't dream about it, but because I never imagined life could change so completely. This is the story of how the people who called me a failure discovered that I was the owner of the very company they admired. And by then, it was already too late to take back their words. Growing up, I always felt like I was competing in a race I had never agreed to enter. My older brother, Ryan, was the family's golden child. Straight A student, captain of the basketball team. Later, he landed a high-paying corporate job. Every family dinner seemed to become another celebration of his success. My parents couldn't stop talking about him. Ryan just got another promotion. Ryan is buying a new house. Ryan's boss says he's one of the best employees they've ever had. Then my mother would look at me. Ethan, have you found a real job yet? That question followed me everywhere. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. The truth was, I wasn't lazy. I simply had a different dream. While everyone else wanted job security, I wanted to build something of my own. I loved solving problems, creating ideas, building businesses, but dreams don't pay bills overnight. For years, I worked small freelance jobs from my tiny apartment. Some months I barely earned enough to cover rent. Other months were even worse. Whenever my family asked what I did for work, they laughed when I explained. So, you're still working from your laptop? Ryan would smirk. I guess someone's got to keep the coffee shops in business. Everyone laughed, even my father. I smiled. But inside, those jokes stayed with me. One Sunday afternoon, my parents hosted a family barbecue. Almost everyone was there, my cousins, my aunt and uncle, Ryan and his wife. As usual, the conversation turned toward careers. One cousin had just become a lawyer. Another had opened a successful dental clinic. Everyone applauded. Then my aunt looked at me. So, Ethan, when are you going to stop chasing impossible dreams? The backyard became strangely quiet. I looked around. Nobody defended me. Not one person. Finally, my father spoke. Your aunt has a point. You've been trying this business idea for years. Maybe it's time to accept that it isn't working. His words hurt more than I expected. Not because they were loud. Because they were calm. Like he had already given up on me. That evening I drove home in silence. For the first time in years, I questioned myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was wasting my life. Maybe success wasn't meant for people like me. As I unlocked my apartment door, my phone rang. It was my business partner Maya. Ethan, you need to answer your emails. What happened? Our presentation. What about it? The investors loved it. I stopped walking. What? They want another meeting tomorrow morning. For a moment, I forgot everything my family had said. Opportunity had finally knocked. The next morning, Maya and I walked into a modern office building. Neither of us tried to act confident. We were nervous. This meeting could change everything. The investors asked dozens of questions. Some were difficult. Others were impossible. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. One of the investors smiled. We believe your software has real potential. We'd like to fund your company. I looked at Maya. She looked back at me. Neither of us spoke. We simply smiled. Years of rejection. Years of doubt. Years of hearing the word, failure. And suddenly, everything had started to change. Over the following month, our small company began growing faster than we had imagined. We hired our first employee, then our second, then our 10th. We moved into a real office. Our software attracted larger clients. Investors kept returning. Revenue continued growing. But I made one decision. I wouldn't tell my family. Not yet, not. Because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted proof. For years they had judged me before seeing the results. This time, the results would speak first. Life became incredibly busy. Most days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. There were challenges every week. Unexpected expenses, difficult clients, technical problems. But for the first time, every problem felt worth solving. Because every obstacle meant we were moving forward. Nearly 2 years passed. Our company had become one of the fastest growing technology businesses in the region. We employed more than 100 people. We had opened a beautiful headquarters downtown, yet almost nobody knew I was the owner. I preferred it that way. Titles never impressed me. Results did. One Friday evening, my mother called. "Ethan, your brother's company is hosting its annual awards banquet next Saturday. They're allowing family members to attend. You should come." I smiled. "I'd love to." She laughed softly. "Maybe seeing successful people will motivate you." I looked out the window of my office. The logo of my own company reflected in the glass behind me. If only she knew. The company hosting that event was mine. And by the end of next Saturday night, my family's opinion of me would change forever. My family called me a failure until they discovered I owned the company, the banquet that changed everything. The entire week flew by. Our leadership team was busy preparing for the company's annual awards banquet. It was the biggest event of the year. Employees from every department would attend. Business partners, investors, and special guests would be there as well. As the founder and majority owner, everyone expected me to open the event with a speech. Normally, I enjoyed speaking with my team, but this event felt different. For the first time, my family would be in the same room without knowing who I really was. On Thursday morning, Maya walked into my office carrying a folder. "Everything is ready," she said with a smile. "The venue is booked, the guest list is complete, and the awards have arrived." I nodded. "Good." She looked at me carefully. "You seem distracted." I laughed quietly. "My family is coming." Her smile disappeared. "The same family that called you a failure?" "Yes." She folded her arms. "Do they know you're the owner?" "No." "And you're really going to wait until the event?" I looked out the window. "I've waited years. I can wait one more night." Maya smiled. "I have a feeling they're in for the biggest surprise of their lives." Saturday finally arrived. The hotel ballroom looked incredible. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Elegant tables filled the room. Large screens displayed the company logo. Hundreds of employees greeted one another with excitement. It wasn't just an awards ceremony. It was a celebration of everything we had built together. I stayed backstage while the guests arrived. No one outside the executive team knew I was there. About 30 minutes later, I looked at the security monitor. My parents had arrived. My brother Ryan walked beside them wearing an expensive suit. He looked confident, just as he always did. My mother smiled proudly as she looked around the ballroom. "This company is incredible," she said. "I wish Ethan had found a place like this." Ryan laughed. He probably wouldn't survive the interview. Everyone around him chuckled. Even from backstage, I heard every word. For a brief moment the old pain returned. Then it disappeared. Not because their words no longer mattered, but because I finally understood something. People can only judge the chapter they've seen. They don't know how the story ends. As guests took their seats, Ryan began introducing himself to several executives. "I've worked in corporate management for years," he said confidently. "If there are any leadership opportunities here, I'd love to discuss them." One executive smiled politely. "I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting our CEO later." Ryan grinned. "I've heard great things about him." He had no idea. The CEO worked for me. Meanwhile, I reviewed my speech one last time. It wasn't about success. It wasn't about money. It was about believing in yourself when nobody else does. Those words weren't written for the audience. They were written for the younger version of me. The one who almost gave up. A few minutes before the ceremony began, Maya stepped backstage. "You ready?" I smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." She adjusted my tie. "After tonight, nothing will ever be the same." The lights dimmed. Soft music filled the ballroom. The host walked onto the stage. "Good evening, everyone." The audience applauded. "We're honored to celebrate another incredible year of growth." And awards were presented. Employees received recognition. Laughter and applause echoed through the room. From backstage, I watched my family enjoying the evening. They had no idea what was coming. Then came the final award. The host smiled toward the audience. "Before we conclude tonight's celebration, I'd like to invite the founder and owner of this company to the stage." The ballroom erupted into applause. My family looked toward the stage with curiosity. Ryan leaned toward my father. "I've always wanted to meet the man who built this business." My father nodded. "He must be an extraordinary leader." I took a deep breath. The stage manager looked at me. "It's time." I stepped forward. The spotlight followed me as I walked onto the stage. For a second, the entire ballroom fell silent. I looked into the audience. My mother's smile slowly disappeared. My father froze. Ryan stared at me in complete disbelief. But no words came out. The host smiled proudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our founder, owner, and chairman, Mr. Ethan Carter." The room exploded with applause. Employees stood to their feet. Investors smiled. My executive team clapped with pride. Only one table remained completely silent. My family's. They looked as though they had stopped breathing. Ryan whispered only 4 words. It can't be him. I walked to the center of the stage, adjusted the microphone, looked directly at the people who had called me a failure. Then I smiled. Good evening, everyone. The story they believed about me was finally over. My family called me a failure until they discovered I owned the company. The truth they could no longer ignore. For a few seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. The applause continued, but my eyes stayed fixed on one table, my family's table. My mother looked completely stunned. My father blinked several times as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Ryan stared at me without saying a word. It was the first time in years that he had nothing to say. I took a deep breath and smiled at the audience. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. The applause slowly faded. I started this company with one dream, one laptop, begged. A lot of people believed in that dream. I paused. But a lot of people didn't. The room became silent. There were days when I questioned myself. There were nights when I wondered if I should quit. I heard people say my dream wasn't realistic. I was told to get a real job. I was told I would never succeed. I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was speaking to every person in that room who had ever been underestimated. But here's something I've learned. Someone else's opinion does not decide your future. Your determination does. The audience erupted into applause. Many employees stood up. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. After the speech, dozens of employees came to congratulate me. Great speech, Ethan. You inspired all of us. We're proud to work here. I thanked each one personally. To me, they weren't just employees. They were the people who had believed in the company long before it became successful. As the crowd began to mingle, I noticed my parents slowly walking toward me. My mother looked nervous. Ethan, she stopped. For the first time in my life, she didn't know what to say. Finally, she whispered, we didn't know. I smiled politely. I know. My father cleared his throat. You built all of this. Yes, by yourself? I shook my head. No. With an incredible team. They looked around the ballroom again. Only now did they realize that every employee greeting me did so with genuine respect. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Ryan finally walked over. He forced a smile. Congratulations. Thanks. I never knew. I know. An awkward silence followed. Then he laughed nervously. So, I guess you've done pretty well. I smiled. I've been blessed. For years I had imagined this conversation. I thought it would feel like revenge. Instead, it felt like closure. Just then Maya joined us. She smiled warmly. Mr. Carter, the investors are ready whenever you are. Ryan looked confused. Mr. Carter. Maya laughed. That's what everyone here calls him. He's too humble to ask for it. But he deserves every bit of respect. My family's expressions changed again. They weren't just discovering I owned the company. They were discovering how much respect I had earned. One of our biggest investors walked over and shook my hand. Ethan, your leadership is the reason we invested. We've backed dozens of companies. But very few founders lead with as much integrity as you do. Thank you. The investor turned toward my parents. You must be very proud. My mother smiled weakly. We are. But I could hear the sadness in her voice. Not because I had succeeded, because she had never believed I would. Later that evening, Ryan approached me again. There might be an opening at your company. He smiled. I'd love to apply. I looked at him calmly. We're always happy to consider qualified candidates. His smile grew wider. Really? Of course. But everyone goes through the same hiring process. No exceptions. His smile slowly disappeared. He had expected special treatment. Instead, he received the same answer every applicant received. At my company, titles and family names meant nothing. Character and ability meant everything. As the banquet came to an end, employees gathered around me for one final group photo. My family stood quietly in the background, watching, listening, learning. For the first time, they saw the man I had become. Not the son who worked from a laptop, not the brother they laughed at, not the failure. They saw a leader, a builder, someone who had quietly turned rejection into motivation. When the ballroom finally emptied, my father walked beside me toward the exit. He looked older than I remembered. Ethan. Yes. I owe you an apology. I stopped walking. I spent years comparing you to Ryan. I thought success only looked one way. I was wrong. He looked down. I should have believed in you. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't change the past, he nodded slowly. Note. But I hope I can be a better father in the future, I smiled. That's a good place to start. As I walked to my car that night, I realized something important. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were right not to give up. And although my family had finally discovered the truth, the biggest lesson was only beginning. My family called me a failure, until they discovered I owned the company's success, tested more than my family. The Monday after the awards banquet felt different. Not because the company had changed, because my life had. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if my family finally respected me. Now that it had happened, I realized respect earned through success wasn't as satisfying as I had expected. The real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was becoming the person I had always wanted to be. As I walked into the office, employees greeted me with their usual smiles. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Morning, Ethan. I smiled back. Nothing inside the company had changed. Everyone still had work to do. New projects, new clients, new challenges. Success wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning of greater responsibility. Later that morning, Maya knocked on my office door. You have a visitor. I looked up. Who is it? She hesitated. Your brother. I wasn't surprised. Send him in. A few seconds later, Ryan stepped into my office. He looked around at the modern workspace before sitting down. I've never been here before, he said. I smiled. Not many people have. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what happened Saturday. So have I. I wasn't fair to you. His words sounded sincere. But I stayed quiet. I judged you. I laughed at your dream, and he looked down. I'm sorry. For the first time in years, I saw humility in my brother's eyes. Thank you, I replied. It means a lot to hear that. Ryan leaned forward. I also wanted to ask you something. I already knew what was coming. My company has been making layoffs. I might lose my job. I listened carefully. I was wondering if there are any management positions here. I smiled politely. There may be opportunities in the future. His face brightened. But you'll have to apply like everyone else. We don't hire people because they're family. We hire people because they're qualified. Ryan nodded slowly. I understand. For years, he had believed connections opened every door. Now he was learning that fairness mattered more than favoritism. A few days later, our human resources director informed me that Ryan had officially submitted his application. His resume was impressive. His experience was real. But so were the applications from dozens of other talented people. I never looked at his application personally. Instead, I asked the hiring committee to evaluate every candidate without names attached. Only experience, only skills, only performance. At the end of the process, the committee selected the strongest applicant. It wasn't Ryan. When he received the decision, he called me. I didn't get it. Were you involved? No. I promised everyone equal opportunity. If I broke that promise for family, I'd lose the trust of every employee in this company. There was a long silence. Finally, Ryan said, I understand. And for the first time in our lives, I think he truly did. Meanwhile, our company continued growing. We opened another office, signed contracts with international clients, hired dozens of new employees. The dream that had once lived inside a tiny apartment had become something much bigger than me. It had become a place where people could build their own dreams. That was something money could never buy. One Sunday afternoon, my parents invited me to dinner. This time, everything felt different. No one asked when I would get a real job. No one compared me to Ryan. Instead, my father smiled. Ethan, would you tell us how you built the company? For the next 2 hours, I shared my journey, the failures, the sleepless nights, the rejected business proposals, the moments I almost gave up. When I finished, my mother quietly wiped away a tear. We only saw your struggles. We never saw your courage. I smiled gently. Most people don't. They only notice success after it happens. As dinner came to an end, my father stood up. I want to say something. Everyone looked toward him. For years, I believed success meant having the highest salary. I was wrong. He looked directly at me. Success is having the courage to keep going when nobody believes in you. Then he did something I never expected. He hugged me. It wasn't a quick, awkward hug. It was the kind of hug fathers give when they're truly proud. For a moment, I felt like the little boy who had spent years hoping to hear those words. I'm proud of you, son. Those 5 words meant more than any business award I had ever received. Driving home that night, I realized life had come full circle. The family who once called me a failure had learned the truth. But more importantly, they had learned not to judge someone's future by their present circumstances, because today's dreamer may become tomorrow's leader. My family called me a failure until they discovered I owned the company, the lesson that changed our family. A few months passed after the awards banquet. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Our company continued to grow faster than ever. We expanded into 2 new cities, welcomed new clients, and hired talented people who believed in our vision. But the biggest change wasn't happening inside the company. It was happening inside my family. For the first time in years, my phone started ringing more often. Not because someone needed a favor, not because they wanted money. They simply wanted to spend time with me. My mother would call just to ask how my day had been. My father would invite me to lunch. Even my cousins, who had once laughed at my dreams, now wanted to hear how I had built the company. I answered every call with kindness. Not because I had forgotten the past, but because I refused to let the past control my future. One Saturday afternoon, my father asked if he could visit my office. Of course, I replied. When he arrived, I gave him a tour of the building. He watched employees working together, sharing ideas and solving problems. Everywhere we walked, people greeted me with respect. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Thanks for your help yesterday, Ethan. Congratulations on the new partnership. My father smiled quietly. I've never seen anything like this. I laughed. It's not just a company, it's a family. We stopped in front of a large glass wall overlooking the entire office. My father looked down at the people working below. I spent years thinking success was measured by money. He shook his head. I was wrong. I looked at him. What changed your mind? He smiled. They don't respect you because you're rich. They respect you because you respect them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he placed a hand on my shoulder. I should have learned that years ago. A week later, our company held an event for young entrepreneurs. More than 300 students attended. Many of them reminded me of myself. Nervous, hopeful, full of ideas, but unsure whether anyone believed in them. The event organizer smiled. Ethan, we'd like you to give the closing speech. I nodded. I'd be honored. As I stood on the stage, I looked across the room. The front row caught my attention. My parents were sitting there. Ryan was beside them. So was Maya. Seeing all of them together made me smile. I walked to the microphone. When I was younger, I began. People often told me my dreams were unrealistic. The audience listened quietly. They weren't trying to be cruel. They simply couldn't see what I could see. I almost believed them. I paused. But dreams don't become impossible because someone doubts them. They become impossible only when we stop believing in ourselves. The room became completely silent. I looked toward my parents. My mother had tears in her eyes. My father lowered his head. Ryan smiled proudly. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competing. We were simply a family. After the speech, dozens of students lined up to meet me. One young man looked especially nervous. Street. Yes, my family says I'll never succeed. I smiled. I've heard those words before. What should I do? I looked him in the eye. Don't spend your life trying to prove people wrong. Spend it proving yourself right. He smiled. I'll remember that. So will I replied. Later that evening, our family gathered for dinner. This time, the conversation felt completely different. Nobody compared careers. Nobody measured success by salaries. Instead, we talked about goals, happiness, and helping others. At one point, my mother quietly said, Ethan, I'm sorry for every time I made you feel like you weren't enough. I reached across the table and held her hand. You don't have to keep apologizing. I know. I just want you to know how much I regret it. I smiled gently. Then let's make better memories from now on. She nodded with tears in her eyes. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. The company had changed my life, but forgiveness had changed my heart. Money could build buildings. Success could earn respect. But only forgiveness could rebuild a family. And that was the greatest achievement of all. My family called me a failure until they discovered I owned the company. The greatest success was never the company. A year passed. Looking back, it was hard to believe how much life had changed. The company had continued to grow beyond anything I had imagined. We opened new offices, welcomed hundreds of employees, and partnered with businesses across the country. People often congratulated me on my success. They called me a successful entrepreneur, a visionary, a leader. I appreciated their kind words, but deep inside, I knew something they didn't. The company wasn't my greatest achievement. The person I had become was. One quiet morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else. I walked through the empty halls, remembering where everything had started. A tiny apartment, an old laptop, countless rejected ideas, sleepless nights, moments when I nearly gave up. If I had listened to every person who doubted me, none of this would have existed. Not the company, not the opportunities, not the lives we had helped change. Success hadn't happened overnight. It had been built one small step at a time. Later that afternoon, Maya knocked on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Always." She smiled as she placed a newspaper on my desk. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur named business leader of the year." I laughed. I never imagined I'd end up in the newspaper. "You earned it," Maya replied. "No," I said with a smile. "We earned it," she laughed. "You still refuse to take all the credit. Because it's the truth. No company is built by one person. It takes people who believe in the same dream." She nodded. "And that's why everyone here believes in you." A few weeks later, our family gathered to celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary. The atmosphere was warm and joyful. There was laughter, music, and stories from the past. At one point, my father stood up and tapped his glass. "I'd like to say something." The room became quiet. He looked around before his eyes finally rested on me. "There was a time when I believed success could only be measured by titles and paychecks." He paused. "I was wrong." He smiled. "My youngest son taught me that success begins with courage. It grows through hard work. And it means nothing if you forget to stay kind." The room filled with applause. I felt my face grow warm, not from embarrassment, from gratitude. After dinner, Ryan walked outside with me. We stood in the backyard looking up at the stars. "You know," he said with a smile, "I used to think we were competing." "So did I, but we never needed to." I nodded. "We just needed to support each other." He extended his hand. "I'm proud of you, little brother." I smiled and shook it. "I'm proud of you too." That simple moment meant more than years of silent rivalry. The following Monday, I announced a new program at the company. Every year, we would provide scholarships and mentorship for young entrepreneurs who couldn't afford to chase their dreams. When employees heard the news, they gave a standing ovation. One young employee asked, "Why is this project so important to you?" I smiled. "Because someone once told me my dreams weren't worth believing in." I don't want anyone else to hear those words without also hearing this. Your future is not decided by other people's opinions. It's decided by your willingness to keep going. As the years passed, people continued asking me the same question. What was the secret to your success? I always gave the same answer. I never stopped believing in my dream. But believing wasn't enough. I had to work when no one was watching. I had to keep going after failure. And I had to stay humble after success. Those lessons became the foundation of both my business and my life. Sometimes, I think back to that family barbecue years ago. The day everyone laughed at my dream. At the time, it felt like one of the worst days of my life. Now I see it differently. Without those moments of doubt, I might never have discovered how strong I could become. Every challenge pushed me forward. Every rejection taught me something new. Every setback prepared me for the future. If you're listening to my story today and you feel overlooked, if people laugh at your goals, if your own family doesn't understand your dream, please remember this: you don't need everyone's approval. You don't need to prove your worth every single day. You only need the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Because success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about becoming the person you were always capable of being. My family once called me a failure. Years later, they discovered I owned the company they admired. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. The biggest surprise was that I never wanted revenge. I only wanted the chance to prove that dreams deserve patience, hard work, and belief. In the end, I didn't just build a successful company. I rebuilt confidence, I rebuilt relationships, and most importantly, I rebuilt myself. The end.